Hi, my name is Ann Fogel-Birchinall, and thank you all so very much for coming to hear Ron Davis. His story about coming to understand his dyslexia and developing a correction program that has helped so many people around the world is really a very remarkable story. Clark Fork School feels very lucky to be able to bring him here to Missoula, and I'd like to thank the Robert Rogan Birchinall Foundation for making this possible, and Kim Bezanson, who has helped my family so much in so many ways, and whose relationship with Ron has made it possible for him to come. 2007 marks the 25th year of education for Clark Fork School. The school currently serves over 50 students per school year in preschool, kindergarten, and primary programs. Throughout the years, the school's purpose has remained constant: to create cooperative educational community in which sense of belonging fosters the unfolding of children's individual abilities, interests, and gifts. Our educational philosophy enables our students to participate successfully, contribute effectively, and to take delight in the communities to which they belong. Clark Fork School focuses on experiential or hands-on learning, much of which takes place outdoors. Our teachers are trained in the Teton Science School's Sense of Place Journeys curriculum, teaching kids to observe, absorb, and get to know the world outside the classroom walls. Students saunter the trails surrounding the rattlesnake location, sketch and journal their observations, and traditional subjects of mathematics, science, history, and literacy are integrated into their outdoor and classroom experiences. Most of our staff have taken the follow-up training in the Davis dyslexia methods for helping kids learn in non-traditional ways. Davis methods are valuable to all learners, and Clark Fork teachers value the tools that they have gained in this training. We are very pleased to have Ron Davis with us today and to teach us more about this important subject. Thank you very much for being here, and I would like to introduce you to Kim Bezanson.
Hi. There's a lot of parents out here, educators, students, and most importantly, dyslexics that I'd like to welcome today. I'm here because I'm a dyslexic mother, and sorry. This was I have a daughter that is 9, and she struggled in kindergarten. And we couldn't seem to find any answers. And she was smart and imaginative, and I just couldn't find anything that would work for her. And phonics I knew wasn't working. I stumbled, as fate would have it, across the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, and I am a word thinker, so this book didn't make sense to me, but it described my daughter. It was her. And so we did a program with her for a week. She was reading at a .02 reading level, if that. And she finished her first grade year with a 2.7 reading level. But most importantly, after she'd finished the week, she looked at me and she said, "Mommy, I can read." And that meant more to me than anything. And because of this experience, I left that. She finished the program on a Friday, and I blindly bought tickets and flew down to San Francisco because the training started on Monday, and I wasn't even sure I was registered in there. And Missoula was fogged in. I had to drive to Bozeman. I had to fly into Oakland and take a BART and get in at 3:30 in the morning, and I wasn't even sure I'd get there. So I'm kind of famous down at Davis headquarters. They call me, I have a lot of passion. Anyway, I finished training, and it's something that's changed my life, as Ron and Alice have. I'd like to thank the Birchinalls for the opportunity to work with Cy and Kopi. They have changed my life in more ways than I can tell. They probably taught me more than I experienced with them. There's also little Bailey in the audience, who was one of my first children that I work with, and I can't tell you what she taught me. So I'd like to thank them. Ron, a little history on Ron. His book is in 18 languages. His Davis Correction Program is the most widely used dyslexia treatment program in the world. There are 400 Davis providers in 36 countries offering this program in 27 languages. He's the founder of the Reading Research Council and the Davis Dyslexia Association International. I thank you for coming today because I'm hoping that you'll look at things through a different way with this lecture. And I have the privilege of introducing a man that changed my life, but more importantly, he changed the course of my daughter's life. He allowed me to think different. Mr. Ron Davis.
Thank you. I'm wearing a microphone. I hope that it's working fine. Is it?
Yes.
Do you hear me in the back? All right, all right. My name is Ron Davis, and the word that brought most of you here is the word dyslexia. And I am a dyslexic adult human being. And now there is another word that goes with that. I am now a corrected dyslexic adult human being. And by using the word corrected, it means that the negative aspects of my dyslexia are no longer present. I can now read and write and spell as well as everyone I know. And I said spell. You know, I still appreciate the spell checker on my computer, but as a general rule, most people would not recognize any characteristics of dyslexia at all. And I feel the reason that you're here is that you would like to know how to correct dyslexia or what needs to be done to help a child or a loved one. And I want to tell you about that. But there's something even more important that I need to tell you about, and that is how it came about that we found a correction for it. The word dyslexia has been around since 1892. And there have been a lot of different treatment programs that have been developed for it, yet none of them seem to work very well. Now, in order for me to explain how we came with a workable technique, I have to tell you about the discovery of that, which means that I have to tell you a little bit about my own history. When I started out in life, I had a problem that's actually much more severe than dyslexia. When I was an infant, my mother was told that I was a Canner's baby. Dr. Leo Canners coined the word autism in the United States. The problem is, I was born in 1942, and Dr. Canners didn't publish using the word autism until 1943. So I was never actually labeled as autistic, only as a Canner's baby. When it came time for me to go into school, the school didn't want someone like me. They didn't know how to deal with me. And they put pressure on my parents to have me put into an institution. Now, at that point in time, my father would have been very happy to have me go away. I was born at the beginning of the Second World War, and my father had heard the words Canner's baby, but he did not know what that was. So at the end of the war, when he came home, he was very surprised to find that he had a 3-year-old mentally deficient child. And very quickly, that surprise turned into shame and then into hatred. So by the time it was time to go to school, he was really ready to have me go away. But my mother was in denial. And she said to the school, he's going to be slow, but you have to take him. So what happened in school is I wound up sitting in the corner of the room with my nose in the corner and with a handkerchief on my head. And I'm often asked why they did the handkerchief, and all I can say is, I don't know. I was the person wearing it. I wasn't the one that put it there, so I don't know why it was there. I do know, however, if it ever fell off, I would get a whack, they would put it back on and push my face tight into the corner. At the beginning of every school year, they put pressure on my parents to have me put away, and at the beginning of every school year, my mother said, he's slow, but you have to keep him. So I don't know what happened the year I was 12. I don't know if the laws changed and the school could act without my mother's permission, or if my mother finally gave in to the pressure. But the year I was 12, the words uneducatable mental retardation were put into my school records. So I am actually a person that has 2 official labels. I am uneducatably mentally retarded, a certified mechanical engineer. Now, one of those labels is actually still accurate. I really am an engineer. If you cut me, I bleed engineer's blood. The marrow of my bones is engineer's marrow. And actually, at the time that I got the other labels, they were also accurate. Excuse me. At the time I was 12, I was in 6th grade sitting in the corner of the classroom. And at that point in time, I didn't even know my own last name. I knew where to go home, but I didn't know the name of the street or the number. And it wouldn't have been any value to know these things because when I was 12, I had not yet learned how to talk. So I couldn't have talked about that. So being labeled uneducatably mentally retarded was actually something that was very good and something that was very bad. It was very good because emotionally and psychologically, I had already begun to develop before then. In essence, I did between the ages of 9 and 12 what a normal child would do between birth and 2. And I did between the ages of 12 and 15 what a normal child would do between the ages of 2 and 4. So emotionally and psychologically, there's an 11-year delay in my development. Well, part of that development, I became aware. I became aware that I was different and that I was being treated differently. And literally, by the time I was 12, there isn't a sin or a crime I would not have committed with a great big grin on my face if it would have gotten me out of the corner of the room. But what they wanted me to do, I couldn't do. I couldn't learn. Now, I got the label mentally retarded, and with that labeling, I no longer had to sit in the corner of the room. I got to turn around and see what everyone else saw. At that time, they also had me change schools, so I was put into a different school with children that didn't tease me the way the children did in the first school. But it wasn't a school for retarded children, it was still a normal school. But I still had the label uneducatable mental retardation. Now, in many respects, that was a very good label. The other children had to do homework. I didn't have to do homework. The other children had to get grades in order to get passed in school. It didn't matter with me, they just let me go. So from that perspective, school was good. But it was the most difficult thing that I've ever done. For other children, school was about education. For me, it was about staying out of trouble. And I have to tell you, I wasn't very good at that. I managed to get into a lot of trouble at school. And I carried the label uneducatably mentally retarded, and over time, there were a lot of other words that got included in that. The other kids simply called me retard. My brother liked to call me an idiot or an imbecile. At school, I was the MR kid. And to my father, I was just dummy. And I think my father had it best. Dummy was both someone who didn't talk and someone who wasn't very bright. And I think I qualified on both counts then. And it wasn't until I was 17 years old that they actually tested my IQ. Prior to that, when I was 12, the school told my mother that I had an IQ of 40. I don't know where that came from because I don't remember being 12. But my mother was told that a chimpanzee has an IQ of 40, and I was going to learn about as much as you could train a chimpanzee. And somehow my older brother found out about that. And I mean, it's very interesting. When there is a family that has someone like me in the family, it pretty much makes the whole family not very functional. And it was especially hard for my older brother because he was responsible for me. He had to take me every place he went, and that ruined his childhood. So I can understand, you know, his resentment, and he would tease me. he would say to me that I was supposed to be a monkey in the jungle, and I wound up being his brother instead. So he used to tell me I was a mistake that God had made. And I didn't know not to believe that. So I always thought that I was a mistake. And at the age of 17, first week of June of 1960, I spent that week being tested for IQ at the University of Utah. And on Friday, they gave me a whole new label. On Friday, they gave me the label genius. And I have to tell you, people treat you a lot differently when you have that label. It was also decided at that point in time that I should get speech therapy and learn how to talk, and that I should learn how to read and write so I could be educated. The speech therapy worked. I learned how to talk in sentences, but the reading training did not work. And back then, the reading training, essentially, I was supposed to crawl around on the floor on my hands and knees for 30 minutes, 2 times a day. And I was to balance on a balance beam and balance on a teeter board 2 times a day for 15 minutes each. And I was supposed to do 40 minutes of phonics training every day until I learned how to read. Well, I have to tell you, I was really good at crawling around on the floor. I could do that without any problem at all. I was also very good at balancing on the balance beam and the teeter board. But the phonics, I could not do. And if you are a person that is like me, after the first 5 minutes of a phonics lesson, it becomes actually emotionally painful. And it is very, very difficult to get through that. And I endured this for almost a year. And finally, they gave up. And the medical doctor told me that I was never, ever going to learn how to read or write. And the reason for that was that when I was being born, the doctor used instruments, and he damaged that part of my brain that I needed to use to learn how to read. Now, my mom said that didn't happen. My mom said, no, 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 no. She said, I came too fast for instruments. But also, my mom didn't always tell me the truth, and it was easier to believe that I was a mistake that a doctor had made than a mistake that God had made. So I believed that I had brain damage and nerve damage, and that I was never, ever going to learn how to read. Yet, I also was aware that, or I had been told, there was knowledge in books. And I was thirsty for that knowledge. I was hungry for it. I wanted it. Yet it was denied to me, and I couldn't get it. So I worked on my own. I struggled on my own. And I got to the point where I could decipher the words. But what the average person could read in 3 to 5 minutes, it would take me an hour. So it isn't that I couldn't read. It's that it was so difficult to do, I didn't read. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's pretty much par for the course for a dyslexic adult. Okay. Now, in spite of the problem that I had, I became an engineer. Well, how does someone that can't read or write become an engineer? Aha! Back in the 1960s, we were in a race with Russia to get to the moon. And at the beginning of that race, in America, we had a severe shortage of engineers. So anyone that was good at doing engineering could be certified as an engineer without having graduated from university. And that's the kind of engineer I am. And I'm sad to say that they don't do that anymore. It makes life a lot more difficult for people like me to have that taken away. So I became an engineer and was very successful. And in the early 1960s, I turned my back on it, and I went to San Francisco to be a hippie. And from your laughter, apparently you do know what that is. Well, I have to tell you, I didn't make a very good hippie. In fact, of all of the things that I have failed at in my life, failing at that was probably the worst, because to a degree it was almost like failing at being a failure. And somebody says, well, isn't that being a success? Well, no, not really. The reason that I failed was because of the drugs. And it isn't that I had a moral or an ethical issue against drugs, it's that I simply didn't like what they did to me. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I fully understand it now. The drugs caused me to be in a disoriented state. And the disoriented state has been at the root of all of my problems for all of my life. And to deliberately do that to myself was very offensive. So I found myself faking being a hippie like I was faking being a normal human being. So I couldn't do it anymore. And that left me in a real problem. I couldn't go back to being an engineer. I couldn't go back to the life of building bombs and missiles and killing people in Vietnam. And I couldn't continue in the hippie lifestyle. So I was stuck. I needed a job. So I got a job as a driving instructor in San Francisco, California. And if you can imagine taking driving lessons from someone who does not know left from right, you can imagine what that would be like. I never asked anyone to turn left because I had no idea which direction that was. So I would simply point in the direction I wanted my student to steer, and that way neither one of us had to figure out which direction that was. And I enjoyed being a driving instructor. Now, actually, oddly enough, being a driving instructor was not my first experience at teaching. When I was 19 years old, I had part of my job was to teach the technicians that worked at Thiokol Corporation calculus. Now, most of you wouldn't know about Thiokol Corporation. More than 15 years ago, we had a space shuttle that blew up on takeoff. The rocket motor that blew up was made by Thiokol. Now, I didn't have anything to do with that motor, I'll tell you to begin with, but working for that corporation, my job was to teach mathematics to the technicians there. And I had a classroom setting with a blackboard and chalk and everything. And it was the most offensive job that I've ever had. As much as I love mathematics, I myself have never, ever learned anything in a classroom. And to find myself in that kind of a setting was actually offensive. So I didn't like teaching mathematics as much as I love mathematics. But as a driving instructor, I enjoyed it because I worked one with the student. And if the student made a mistake, we caught it immediately. We would figure out a solution, excuse me, implement the solution, and the mistake would disappear. And for me, that is a feeling of instant gratification. And I really loved that feeling, so I really loved that job. But the company I worked for were cheating my students, and I caught them at it. And when I confronted them, they denied it, so I was left with the choice of either being fired or quitting, so I quit. So I had to find something else to do. So I started a Volkswagen repair shop. That's not a bad thing for an ex-hippie engineer to do in San Francisco. I mean, it was pretty good. And not long after that, I started a metals brokerage company. And not long after that, I got involved in buying and selling real estate on the San Francisco Peninsula. And not long after that, I realized the great American dream for the second time in my life. And we all know what that is. The great American dream is to be a millionaire, right? That is a dream other people had. I never had that as a dream. I had a different dream. My dream was that no one was ever going to discover that I was a mistake. no one would ever find out that I couldn't read or write. And what better way to hide that kind of a shameful secret than behind being successful? So I was successful, not for the money, not for the perks that go with being successful. I was successful to hide a shameful secret. And I was very good at it because no one ever discovered that I couldn't read or write. Now, in the late 1970s, the real estate market where we live started to decline. And my wife and I came to the conclusion we had more than enough money for the rest of our lives. We didn't need to work, so we retired. I was 35 years old. And retirement means that you don't go to work anymore. Well, I had to work to hide my problem. So work was very important for me. And not being able to go to work meant that I wasn't able to hide my problem. And it's not just hiding it from other people. I also was trying to hide it from myself. And because I wasn't able to hide the problem, I started to experience something that I didn't recognize at the time. I started to experience depression. And I'm the kind of person that's afraid of doctors, so I wouldn't go to a doctor with this problem. I just had to suffer with it. And eventually I got to the point where I realized that if I don't do something about this problem, I'm simply going to die. Now, for me, most of my life, my real narcotic is art. I can start to play around. I can start to sketch something or draw something or chip a piece of stone or carve a piece of wood or draw. And literally, the rest of the world goes away until I finish doing what I'm doing. Well, if I can't be hiding my problem behind work, I can be oblivious to it with art. Now, I didn't feel that I had enough talent to actually earn a living as an artist, but I didn't need to earn a living anymore. So I started to play. And within a year, I was working as a portrait sculptor. And I found I could make a wonderful living as an artist. Everything I made, I was selling. And if I ever have the misfortune again of retiring, I'm going to go back and be an artist again, because for me, it's like dying and going to heaven. But it was while I was working as an artist that I noticed things that didn't make sense to the engineer in me. There are certain things that you have to believe without exception in order to be a good engineer. And one of these things is very simple. It's a structure will function consistent with its condition. I mean, that's so simple, I'll repeat it again. A structure will function consistent with its condition. Now, if we think about this for a minute, if the bridge doesn't go all the way across the river, it doesn't matter how many times you go down the bridge, you're not going to get to the other side. If the toaster is broken, it doesn't matter how many times you put the bread in there and push the thing down, you're not going to get toast, okay? Well, I believed that my problem was a structural problem. I believed that I had brain damage. My toaster was broken. And what I noticed was that when I was at my artistic best, I was at my dyslexic worst. That's impossible. If my problem is a structural problem, that means it has to be consistent. You can't change it. It's going to be the same all the time. And I noticed that I was doing something that changed it. And what that said to me on the inside, said to the engineer, is, the problem is not what you think. The problem is not a structural problem. Well, if it's not a structural problem, what is it? It has to be a functional problem. And if the problem is functional, that means that I'm either doing something that causes it to be there, or I am failing to do something that causes it to be there. And with that thinking, I became a researcher into the field of dyslexia. Not anyone else's, my own. Because I had to start looking for, well, maybe there's something I can do in here that will make it go away altogether. It took me about 30 hours to find something I could do in here that made it go away altogether. Now, prior to this, I had never read a whole book. You know, I kind of did, but not really. And the day that I discovered how to turn it off, I went to a library and I read a book from cover to cover in one day. Now, I had never dreamed of the ability to read a whole book. That dream would have been a nightmare. I never prayed for the ability to read a whole book. That's not the kind of prayer I thought God would answer. So one day in my life, I had an experience that was beyond my ability to dream and beyond my ability to pray. And as a result of that experience, two things happened. The first thing that happened was I stopped thinking of myself as a mistake. It was the first day in my life that I accepted myself as being a real, whole human being. The other thing that happened that day is I made a mistake. I made the mistake of thinking I had cured myself of dyslexia. I mean, one day I can't read a street sign, and the next day I can read a whole book. I must be cured. Now, prior to this, I never told anyone that I couldn't read. This was something that I was ashamed of. I didn't want anyone to find out. Most of my life was spent in trying to hide it. But after I thought I was cured, man, I didn't waste any time in telling people. And, you know, prior to then, I didn't know any other people that had dyslexia. I actually thought I might be the only one. But when I started talking about it being cured, they started coming out of the woodwork. You know, what did you do? How did you do it? And well, I can't tell you, but I think I can show you. So I had people to mess around with, to work with. And I started doing with them what I had done with myself. And lo and behold, in maybe 30 hours or less, they're reading out of the newspaper. And they're understanding what it is that they're reading. Now, this breakthrough that I made for myself happened in December of 1980. By April of 1982, I realized that I was not cured. I realized that at the very most, all I had done is I'd found a piece to a puzzle. Now, it was a puzzle piece that nobody else seemed to know anything about, but that's all it was. So, at that point in time, I and two other people created an organization called the Reading Research Council. And we had two basic goals in mind. The first goal was, let's see if we can find the rest of the puzzle pieces. Let's see if we can figure out what dyslexia really is. And the second goal was, if we can find the puzzle pieces, let's see if we can figure out how to put the puzzle together to actually make it go away. Well, the three of us, one of us disappeared because we started going in a direction the third one didn't want to go. And eventually our number grew to 15 people. And by December of 1981, we knew what the basic puzzle pieces were. And by April of 1982, we knew what we would have to do in order to correct dyslexia. We hadn't done it yet, but we knew what we would have to do in order to make it go away. And what we found out about dyslexia went against everything that people believed about dyslexia. At the time that we made this breakthrough, there were three theories prevalent about what dyslexia was. The first theory was that it was brain damage or nerve damage in the left angular gyrus of our brain. Now, over time, doing autopsies, they never found brain damage in the left angular gyrus of dyslexic brains. So in the early 1900s, in 19-teens, there was a medical doctor, his name was Dr. Samuel Torrey Orton. He decided to redefine dyslexia. And his first definition of dyslexia was that dyslexia is caused because of cross-lateralization in someone's brain. And what that means is that the left side of your brain is doing what the right side should do, and vice versa. Well, his theory got published, and very quickly, he changed his mind. But it was a little bit too late because it already got published, so there were people that were believing that, even though the man that came up with the idea no longer did. And what he did is he watered down his original theory, and he said dyslexia is caused because of mixed hemispheric dominance, which means that sometimes for some things, the left side of the brain does what the right side should do, and vice versa. These three theories are still the predominant theories about dyslexia in the United States today. They're all good. They all make sense. I mean, you can't really find holes with any of them. The only problem is they're wrong. What we discovered is that dyslexia is a product of three things. It's a product of a talent. A talent is a natural ability that human beings have. It is a product of thought, and it is a product of how some of us react to the feeling of confusion. In other words, we don't have a disease. There's nothing wrong with us other than the fact that we have a talent, a specific way of thinking, and we react to being confused a little differently than other people. Now, in order to draw this out, the natural talent that we have has to do with a condition that we call disorientation. And if you have ever been in a vehicle that's stationary and something outside your vehicle moves and you have the sensation that you're in motion, you have experienced this. And by the way, when that is happening to you, you are as dyslexic as I am. The very part of your brain that creates that phenomenon for you is what I use to make dyslexia with. And all human beings experience what we call disorientation. It is one of the pieces of going to sleep at night, is that you must disorient before you go to sleep, or else you will be a sleepwalker. You'll be up, moving around in the night, trashing your bedroom or something while you're asleep. So disorientation is natural and normal. All human beings do it. The difference is some of us were born with a genetic code that gave us access to the function of disorientation. And we discovered it when we were infants. Probably the very first time we ever used this function was to recognize the person that feeds us. Because when you're in an oriented state, all your brain can see is what your eyes see. All your brain can hear is what your ears hear. And your balance and movements, all of your senses are limited. Yet when you're in a disoriented state, it's like you can see through walls. It's like you can see around a corner. Your ability to detect odors might be 10 times greater if you choose it to be. And sounds, your ability to hear can be enhanced. And what happens with disorientation is there's a part of your brain that when it turns on, it causes a distortion in your perception. And we don't distort just one of our perceptions, we distort all of them with the exception of the sense of taste. So when we are disoriented, we can change how well we are hearing. Or we can allow ourselves to be more aware of the environment. We can see things in the environment that other people cannot see. We can sense things that we can't see. So disorientation, when we discover it, we are using it to help us recognize the objects in our environment, and we're doing this as early as maybe 3 months of age. In the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, I give a statement there about a 3-month-old infant laying in a baby crib. And from the infant's perspective, all they can see is the end of a dresser drawer and so much of someone's elbow sticking out from behind it. If that infant can trigger a disorientation, the infant can actually see the face that's attached to the elbow. And if he can see the face, he can recognize whether or not it's the person that feeds him. But if the infant cannot trigger a disorientation, all the brain is going to see is the elbow. The only other methods there are for recognizing someone from only their elbow are the processes of analytical reasoning and logic. And those processes won't even begin to develop until the infant is 3 years old. So here we have a 3-month-old infant laying in a baby crib that is capable of making a recognition that they shouldn't be able to make for 3 more years. This simple thing that this child can do is going to change every aspect of their early childhood development. This child is next going to start using this ability to explore their environment. They're going to be very, very environmentally aware. And after they've explored the environment using disorientation, they're at a crossroads. The next thing is they're going to go one way or the other way. Let's go down this path here. If we go down this path, we already recognize the objects. We don't know their names, but we know what they are in our environment. So we're not motivated to become mobile. We don't need to get out there in the environment. We don't need to get our hands on it. We don't need to get it in our mouth to explore it, because we have already done that using disorientation. So the time comes when we should get up and walk. We don't. I mean, we're not even crawling very well when we should be up and walking. And the parents are worried because we're supposed to be walking and we're not. So now they've got the doctors involved, and there's something wrong with the baby because he's not developing correctly. That's one path. The other path is just the opposite. We have explored this stuff mentally. Now is the time to get our hands on it, get it in our mouth, and explore it that way. So we are very, very motivated to become mobile. So the time comes when we should be crawling, and boy, we're up going, and we only crawl for a week or two, and then we're up on our feet, and we have gone. So now these parents are very proud of their child. He's walking early. The only difference between the two children is the motivation. There isn't anything wrong or anything special about either one of them. Now, the same thing is a crossroads for communication. One of these individuals can be very motivated to communicate, so language comes very early. The other way, there's no need to communicate at all. We've got it already, we can see it, we can experience it, we don't need to communicate. So language doesn't come. And again, we have worried parents and proud parents, and the only difference between the children is the motivation. There's nothing wrong and nothing special about either one. Does that make sense? Yeah. So every aspect of our early childhood development is going to be influenced by our ability to use disorientation. And, you know, there are two ways that a human being can think. There's something called verbal conceptualization. And if you're doing this kind of thinking, you're sitting there talking to yourself inside of your head. This is what most people thinking is. The other kind of thinking is nonverbal conceptualization. And when you're doing that, you're not aware of doing anything at all. And the reason is that it happens too fast. But if we slow it down and see what's going on, if you're thinking verbally, non-verbally, you're thinking with images. And the image isn't just the pictorial part. In that image is the feeling, the sounds, the smells, the taste. Every perception is contained in the image that we can think with. Okay? Now, I am a picture thinker. I have not yet learned how to think with the sounds of words. I experimented with it and it was a disaster. So essentially, my mind is silent. It does not talk to me. Yet I am standing in front of you and I'm trying to explain to you what dyslexia is with words. It would be so much easier if I showed you what it is. And I think I would like to do that. Now, if you're a person that doesn't like to do exercises and talks, it's okay if you sit out. I mean, you don't have to do this. But if you really want to understand the mechanics of dyslexia, just follow the instruction. And the first instruction is actually a question. The question is, how good is your imagination? If I were to ask you to imagine an elephant, could you do that? Okay, with a show of hands, how many actually imagined the elephant? Okay. Was it Gray or was it one of the cartoon ones? How many had a real picture? And then how many had a cartoon one? Okay. Let's erase the elephant. And I want you to imagine home. Imagine home. How many of us see the outside of a place to live? How many see the inside? And how many of us have got pictures of both? Okay. Imagine school. Imagine school. How many have outside? How many have inside? How many have both? Okay. A lot of us dyslexics can see the outside just fine, but the inside sometimes is difficult. Okay. Imagine a stack of books. Does anyone have paperback stack in a paperback book stack? How many of us have mixed paperback and hardback? And then the rest of us are pretty much hardback? All right. Imagine a pile of papers. How many of us have a neat pile? No, I don't ask the other question. Okay. Imagine a pencil. Imagine a pencil. Is there anyone that has one that doesn't have the rubber on the end of it? We've got a few. Dyslexics have to have the eraser. I mean, it's got to be there. Imagine the. Imagine the. How many imagine the letters THE? Is there anyone that imagines something other than the letters THE? No, yeah, well, some of us we expect. Imagine and. Imagine and. Okay. Does anyone have anything other than the word A-N-D? Okay. How many of us got an ampersand? Okay. Did anyone get anything other than letters or ampersand? Not very many. A few. Imagine a. Imagine a. Anyone have anything other than a letter? We've got a few, not many. Now, in order to understand what we just experienced, there are two things that we have to look at first. The first thing that we have to look at is we have to realize that language mirrors the thought process. If it did not, language would be way too complicated for anyone to learn. And if we look at language, we see that language is composed of three parts. Actually, language is composed of symbols that are composed of three parts. What the symbol looks like when we see it, what the symbol sounds like when we hear it, and what the symbol means. So far, so good? Okay. The next thing that we have to realize is that some of us can think with sounds and some of us think with pictures. And if you are thinking with sounds, you're thinking with what the symbol sounds like. So if you know what the sound of the word is, you can think with that word. Okay? But there are some of us that are thinking with pictures. So we're not thinking with sound, we're thinking with either what the language looks like or what it means. Well, if we're thinking with what the language looks like, we would have to read our thoughts the same way we would read the newspaper, because we would be looking at written words. So all that's left when you're doing nonverbal thinking is you are thinking with the meaning of language in the form of pictures, and the pictures are happening 32 pictures every second. Now, what happened when I said imagine something about imagining an elephant? What you did is you shifted into your imagination mode and doing nonverbal thinking, imagination mode. Almost every person in this room can think successfully with elephants, home, school, books, papers, and a pencil. But almost none of you can think with the, and, or non-verbally. Now, when I said imagine the, I heard a few little sighs going on. How many of you felt confused when I said that, all right? I have to apologize to you. I did that on purpose. I wanted you to feel that feeling. That feeling that you felt is what causes the symptoms of dyslexia to come. That feeling of confusion. Now, what happened is I said, imagine the, and there was no picture. Actually, there was. There was a picture that was blank. And a blank picture has that feeling. That is exactly the feeling of a blank picture. Any blank picture feels exactly the same way. All blank pictures feel exactly the same way. And that feeling is the feeling of confusion. Now, what most of you would do, when I said imagine the, you would automatically shift over to the other kind of thinking, and you would say to yourself inside of your head, the, did he say the? There's no picture for the. Okay. Well, when you make that shift, what happens is the feeling goes away. It made the feeling of confusion go away. But imagine being 9 years old and you're sitting in a classroom someplace and you can't make the shift. You can't do the other kind of thinking. You have no way of making that feeling go away. So what happens is that feeling starts to build. And it builds and builds and builds until you reach your limit. You can't stand it anymore. And when you reach that limit, what turns on is disorientation. The moment the disorientation occurs, your brain is no longer seeing what your eyes see. It's seeing a distortion. Your brain is no longer hearing what your ears hear. It's hearing a distortion. Your balance and movement senses have just switched around. You feel like you're moving. If you're sitting still, you feel like you're sitting still if you're moving. And you feel like you're out of balance. And in addition to that, your clock on the inside has either speeded up or slowed down. Well, guess what happens if it speeds up? You're going to be nailed with being hyperactive. And if it slows down, you're going to be nailed with being hypoactive. And these are the characteristics of disorientation. This is what happens when we get sufficiently confused, is we become disoriented. So everything you see is wrong. It's not accurate. Everything that you hear is wrong. It's not accurate. So everything you learn in that instance is wrong because it's not accurate. And then later, when you have to bring back the information that you just learned, guess what? It's going to have a new name. It's going to be called a mistake. And none of us like to make mistakes. So when we make mistakes, we have emotional reactions to making mistakes. And eventually our emotional reactions evolve into simple frustration. And probably the best single word to describe what it's like to be a dyslexic when you're in grade school is the word frustration. Now, frustration, like any other emotion, we have a limit to the amount of frustration that we are willing to or capable of experiencing. When we reach the limit, we have to do something about the problem. So what usually happens, and usually it's about around the age of 9 that the child reaches this point. So what will usually happen is the child will go to a parent, usually it's a mother, and say, please don't make me go to school anymore. I'm not smart enough to go to school. I'm just too dumb. Don't make me do it anymore. And this is the child's first attempt to not have the problem. Well, he's breaking the mother's heart, but the mother knows that he has to go to school. So his first attempt at solving it doesn't work. So the mom says, oh, honey, you've got to go to school. But I know that you're struggling. I will try to help you. Together, we're going to get you through this. But you're going to make it. And what happens then is the child finds other solutions. By the time the child is 12, he will have solutions already in place for all of the forms of dyslexia. And a solution is going to be a method of doing something, or a method of remembering something that will be a compulsive behavior. An example of an old solution is something as simple as the alphabet song. If we learn the alphabet song as a training pattern, within 2 years, the song can disappear and we can recite the alphabet without singing it. But if you are dyslexic and you get the alphabet song in the form of a solution to the dyslexia, if you live to be 100 years old, the only way you're ever going to recite the alphabet is to either sing that silly song, either out loud or silently. And if you're like looking up a 5-letter word in the dictionary, you're going to hear part of that silly song 5 times. The problem is an old solution is a compulsive behavior. Compulsive means that you're not in charge of it. It happens automatically. And because it happens automatically, even if you catch yourself doing it, you can't stop it. And of all of the old solutions we can have, there is one that is the most common. Almost all dyslexics will develop it if they stay in school long enough. And it's simply called concentrate. And when we concentrate, when we learn that, everybody is happy. Oh, he's finally making a little progress, you know, without realizing that along with this old solution he's got, for the rest of his life, his reading speed is going to be 1/3 to 1/10 the speed of ordinary people. If what he is reading is important, he's going to have to read it and reread it and reread it many times to make sure he's got it correct. And his stamina for reading, how long he can spend before he gets a headache doing it, is going to be quite short. And there's another dyslexia society that lists the most common characteristics of adult dyslexia. And they are slow reading, the necessity to reread the same material over and over again, and a low reading stamina. These are not characteristics of dyslexia. They are characteristics of the most common solution, old solution, to dyslexia. So dyslexia changes over time. But we can actually correct it. And I think that, I don't know what time we're geared to take a little bit of a break, but I think it's about time that we do. Are you in agreement that we take a break? Yeah. Okay, let's do it. So we'll try to be back in 15 minutes. I left with the idea that over time, dyslexia changes within an individual. What dyslexia is up to about the age of 9, then it changes between 9 and 12, and then it goes through another change after that. So if we're going to look at solving it, there are actually 2 approaches that we can go with. One of them has to do with something that can be done in a school setting. In other words, if we have a sequence of steps that are a strategy, that an adult dyslexic does this and the problem is resolved, what would happen if a child in school, beginning in kindergarten, starts doing the same thing, and by the time they finish 3rd grade, they've got that entire job done? This is something called Davis learning strategies, and it is done in a school setting. And the original purpose of Davis learning strategies was to prevent the development of learning disabilities. And when I say learning disabilities, and when I use the word dyslexia, I don't mean just a reading problem. Dyslexia can affect reading, writing, speaking, spelling, mathematics, paying attention, telling time, environmental awareness. I mean, all of these things are included under the umbrella of dyslexia. And Davis learning strategies will prevent math problems, handwriting problems, attention deficit disorder problems, reading problems, all of it, by doing this before the child has finished 3rd grade. We pilot studied this down near where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we did a 6-year pilot study in 6 schools. And in the entire period of time, all of the children that went through this program were the children that were starting school in kindergarten that year, and then first grade the second year, and third grade the fourth year that they're there. Okay. In all of this study time, there was not a single child that was referred to special education. There were no signs of hyperactivity. There were no math problems, handwriting problems, spelling problems. Any of those problems were recorded, and I was very happy about that. The people that did the study were more enthused about something other than that. Here in the United States, for those of you that don't know, we have special ed for those of us that are slower. And then we have accelerated programs, gifted programs for those children that are faster than the ordinary children in the classroom. And the nationwide average of children that qualify for gifted is 5%. In all of our studies in the 6 years, the lowest number we had was 10%. And we recorded as high as 40% of the individuals going through the Davis Learning Strategies program. 40% qualified for accelerated programs. So this must tell you that there is something of value for all of the students that are doing a Davis Learning Strategies program, not just the ones that would potentially develop some kind of a learning problem. Okay? So that's the one line to go through. And this, I'm hoping, will eventually be the future for the treatment of dyslexia. If this were in the school system, the word dyslexia would eventually disappear. Okay, but it's not. And it's going to take a long time for it to get there if it can. So we also have to have a different strategy. When I wrote the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, what I visualized was a mother of a 9-year-old child. And the child came to the mother and said, please don't make me go to school anymore. I'm not smart enough to do this. I hate it. I can't do it. The mother's heart is breaking. The mother gets a copy of this book and sits down with the book in her lap. She reads step 1, she has her child do the step 1. She reads step 2, has the child do step 2. And within a year, the problem is gone. My thinking was, if a mother of a 9-year-old can do this, the husband of a 25-year-old or the wife of the 30-year-old or grandparents can do this. Well, because the book is in 18 different languages and I get emails from around the world of it being done by parents and grandparents and husbands and wives, it is possible. But as a general rule, moms are not really very good at being counselors for their own children. Husbands and wives are worse. I mean, forget about it. I mean, it's just not going to work. So there has to be a network of people who are professionally trained to be providing these services. And in Montana, there are 4 individuals who are licensed Davis facilitators, so it is available to you in this state. And I think before we're finished, we're going to have the facilitators that are here stand up and for introductions. Okay. Now, what is it that we need to do? How are we going to correct the dyslexia? Like, I was very busy being a researcher and part of a research team, and my job was I was the senior researcher and I was senior guinea pig, and we were trying to figure out how I could get rid of my old solutions. See, by controlling orientation, you can make it look like the problem isn't there. You catch yourself making symptoms, you turn it off and you're not making symptoms anymore. It looks like it's gone, okay? But if you've got an old solution sitting there that's compulsive, when that old solution turns on, you can't simply turn it off. It's not going to turn off. And we need to get rid of the old solutions. I realized that as long as I have the old solutions, I might as well actually keep the original problem, because nothing is actually going to change. So my push was to find a way of eliminating old solutions. And at first I thought this is going to be easy. We'll develop a psychological technique, we'll get in there, and if you can have the person experience something that works better than the old solution should disappear. So the thrust was to be able to get the person to experience something other than the old solution. The problem is, the old solution is a compulsive behavior. So the moment you get close enough to it, automatically it will turn on, and you just can't have an alternate experience. It won't allow you to do that. So we started exploring different psychological ways of doing it, right? And what we're dealing with has to do a lot with emotion and frustration. And the more we did it, the more emotion and frustration I was experiencing. And it seemed like every day we were actually going in the wrong direction. And I got to the point where I'd had it with it. I wanted to quit. And the only thing that kept me going was the thought in the morning, well, maybe today's the day that is going to break loose. And that night I would drag myself home thinking, this is never going to work. And then the next morning, the thought, well, maybe today, right? And when we first started out, we had a lot of money, but I was running out of money. And it was down to the point where I was so low on money that I was actually shutting down the operation. And we were having a meeting, and I was, getting everything in line to shut it down. And somebody asked a question in that meeting that just shook me to the bone. I mean, here we are trying to get rid of these old solutions. And the person asked the very innocent question, well, why do you have that old solution in the first place? Why is it even there? That old solution is there because of the emotion and the frustration that I am experiencing. We're going after the wrong thing. We need to go after the emotion and the frustration, right? So we're back in business, and we're working on addressing the emotion and frustration, and what we're getting is more emotion and more frustration. So luckily I didn't have enough money to torture myself very bad. So we backed off again, and then the next question was asked, well, why is the emotion and the frustration there? And the answer is, because we make mistakes. And why are the mistakes there? The mistakes are there because when we get disoriented, our brain isn't getting what we're actually seeing, it's getting a distortion. So we're getting it wrong in the first place. So the answer is, if we're oriented, we don't get it wrong. The thing is, we already had a way of turning off or terminating a disorientation, yet the old solution is still there. So then the next question is, well, what caused the disorientation in the first place? And what causes the disorientation in the first place? It turns out it is a feeling. It is a feeling that many of you experienced a little earlier in the workshop. It is that feeling of confusion that stimulates the disorientation. Well, where does that feeling come from? You already know it comes from the blank picture. Well, if we need to get rid of that feeling, guess what we need to do? We need to fill in the blanks. If we fill in the blanks, then there aren't any more blank pictures, so there isn't that feeling anymore, turning on the disorientation. Without the disorientation, we don't make the mistakes. Without the mistakes, we don't have the emotional reaction. Without the emotional reaction, no old solution. And I'm thinking, this is right up my alley. I think with pictures, this is going to be a piece of cake. Now, the question was, how can we get someone who is dyslexic to have a picture of the word the? I mean, what under the sun could happen, or could he do that, somebody that's 50 years old, in 50 years they didn't ever get the picture. What are we going to do to allow that to happen? Well, very fortunately, one of the people on the research team had been autistic as a child. and already knew how to do that. And it goes back in my lifetime to when I was a youngster, and I have an older brother and a younger brother. And my brothers, my mom tried to make life as normal as she could for my brothers. So my older brother and my younger brother were allowed to do things and allowed to have things that I wasn't allowed. Like, my brothers had wristwatches. Oh, I so desperately wanted a wristwatch. No, I couldn't have a wristwatch. My brothers had a tree house in the apple tree. I was not allowed to go to that tree house. I desperately wanted. I wasn't allowed. My brothers had pocket knives. I would have killed to have a pocket knife. And that's why I didn't have one. But somewhere in the void of autism, I discovered a wonderful substance where you just take dirt and water and you mix it together. And you make a substance that you can make anything you want to out of. And luckily, where I grew up in our backyard, used to be the bottom of Lake Bonneville. We had this wonderful red clay. I mean, it's not very good for growing stuff, but it's great for making things out of. So my brother's wristwatches were made out of metal and leather. My wristwatch was made out of red dirt, string, and a stick, but I had one. And I can't tell you how many pocket knives I made out of that red dirt and water, because even if I put it in the sun and let it dry thoroughly and it got as hard as a rock, within a week in my pocket it's dirt again, so I had to make another one. So I discovered through the red dirt and water that I could have the things that I most desperately cherished. And I was making pocket knives and wristwatches and this kind of thing out of this before I got labeled mentally retarded. And then when I got labeled mentally retarded, I got to turn around and see what other people saw in the classroom. And in the classroom I was sitting in, around the ceiling was a banner that had the alphabet letters, both uppercase and lowercase. And my mom, bless her heart, had worked on me every day that I could remember, trying to teach me the alphabet. And my mother's native language was German. And you know they have that silly song in German too? And I couldn't learn that song all the way to the letter G. I could never do it all the way to G. But seeing these images out of the clay, I had my clay place, my pit in the backyard. I started making models of the letters. And eventually I got a model of every one of them made, and then I eventually got them in the right sequence and then in the right attitude. And then I could ask my brothers what they were. Now, realize I didn't talk very well, and I would like point at a letter and I would say, what's? And my brother would say, Z. Ah, what's? N. And I go, N, Z, N, Z, N, Z. And I learned the N that way, and I learned the Z that way. And I learned the names of the letters that way. And then after that, if someone asked me to say the alphabet, the letters, I would just rattle them off, right? And you know, most people don't know the alphabet well enough to know that you've said all the letters if you don't say them in the right sequence. It's got to be in sequence. So I worked so I could do it in sequence, and I did it backwards. For over 20 years, I could say the alphabet from the Z side before I learned to say it from the A side. And I actually think it was all those years my mother tried to pound it into my head through my ears that prevented it from going in from the A side. Yeah. And I was coming awake, I was coming alive about that point in time. I have no memory, real memory, before the age of 12. But between 9 and 12, there are little spots. I mean, there are pictures that I don't know who the people are or where the places were, but I do have a picture of someone someplace, right? But after the 12th birthday, somewhere after that, the memory started, and then it was everything that I experienced was there. And I was coming alive, I was coming awake into a universe that was a horrible, horrible place. It was totally full of chaos, totally full of physical pain. And I was losing my ability to escape from it into the void of autism. I was losing it. And the majority of the pain was coming from the beatings that I received from my father. My father didn't have the capacity to deal with me. And his only ability to communicate was through physical, we would now today call it abuse. Now, I was beaten regularly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. There is evidence of 36 broken bones between the ages of 3 and 13. Now, we hear about that now, and a person that would do that today would probably wind up in jail. I have to tell you, the little community that I came from, my father was expected to do that. I mean, this was not abuse. This was, you know, what he was supposed to do. And I'm very lucky, because if I had been born 50 years earlier, his job would have been to take me out in the woods and come home alone. So at least, you know, that didn't happen. But my life was very uncomfortable because of the physical pain. So I started making models of this man, this monster man that would hurt me. And then whenever he would beat me, I would go and get one of those models and I would smash it and I would grind it into dirt, just grind it away. And I did that for a while. And my older brother used to beat me up a lot too. So I had models of him and I would smash and I would grind. And most of the time I didn't like anybody in the family, so I'd smash and grind everybody. And without realizing it, what I was doing is I was creating for myself a concept basic to the concept of change. And that was the first step on coming out of being autistic. And, you know, we as human beings, we are transient beings. We live in the moment. So as a result of that, we can observe change, yet we can't even experience our observation of change because we're living in the moment. What we experience is the product of change. What we see when we are seeing something changing is we're seeing the new product that is evolving. Does that make sense? So as a human being, what we actually experience for change is consequence. Okay? And consequence is something that happens as a result of something else. And when I'm making these concepts of the beatings and the smashing up the clay and then models of what I did that caused the beatings, I'm creating for myself the ability to think with consequence. What I discovered was that when I made an idea out of clay, I could think with that idea. Now, it didn't have a name. It didn't need a name. I could think with the idea. So I mastered the concept of consequence, and as a part of that, before and after, and cause and effect. And once you've got before and after, then the next thing that happens is time. Time is, in its simplest form, the measurement of change. But we can't have it be that simple, can we? We're, as people, we have 2 different standards for it. So time is the measurement of change in relation to a standard. And then once time exists for us, then the next concept is the way things follow each other one after another, in time, in size, in amount, in importance, or in arbitrary order. And once we've got the concept of sequence, the next thing is the concept of order. Okay? Order is a totally man-made concept. It's barely based on a real law. See, God's perfect order, nature's perfect order, is all that exists. There is no disorder in nature. Everything in nature exists where nature put it, in the proper position, in the proper place, and in its proper condition. But we as human beings cannot exist in nature's perfect order, can we? I mean, we have to have our clothing and we have to have our shelter, and we don't like to eat stuff that isn't cooked right, and so we have moved away from our ability to survive in nature's order. So it is very important that we be able to create an order that we can survive in. Now, everything that exists is someplace. If it wasn't in some place, it wouldn't exist. So everything that exists has a place for its existence. And everything that is existing in a place has a position in that place that it is existing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And everything that exists had a beginning and it will have an end. So we have a time continuum for something that is existing. Well, that time continuum, birth, death, creation, disappearance, right? Where the thing is in its time continuum is its condition. So, order then is when something is in its proper place, in its proper position, and in its proper condition. Disorder is when something, one of those three or more, is missing. When I had the ability to think with order as opposed to disorder, the chaos went away in the universe that I am coming alive in. The natural enemy of chaos, the natural enemy of confusion is order. And when I could think with order, I could put order into the environment, and the chaos of this world disappeared for me. Now, I'm still autistic. I was about 15, I think, when I mastered the concept of order. And this is the way that I came out, with the red dirt and the water. Then when I was 17, and I got labeled, between 15 and 17, I maybe did, 60 more ideas that I could think with. And I scored so high on the IQ test that I got a new name. And they told me that I would never be able to read or write, therefore I would never be able to learn. And what they didn't know is that I knew how to learn. I learned with my red dirt and water. And then I discovered something that made it easier. I discovered plastiline clay. That meant that I could learn without getting dirty. And then there were subjects, there were textbooks that I wanted the information out of. And I couldn't read the textbook. But the textbooks have glossaries. And the glossaries are the words that are explained in the chapters in the textbook. So I went to the glossary. It might take me 10 minutes or 15 minutes to figure out the one sentence. And then it might take me 2 minutes to make a clay model of it. And by the time I'm 17, words are now a part of my universe, so I include with it a word. And the word is that part. In other words, I now am making what the word means in clay, what the word looks like in clay, and then I say the word. In other words, I go through a little ritual and I tell my creation, you are a butt. And you mean that you are touching something. And you, word, you say a butt and you mean something is touching something. And now I have the ability to think with a butt. If you say that word to me, guess what the picture is I get? Ah. And if I'm looking at that picture and I'm talking to you, guess what the word is? Ah. It's right. So these are the things that I already knew when we were now needing to be able to master the, okay? So how do we do the? You look up the meaning, and I do this kind of talking and teaching and stuff all around the world now. I will say, even though Americans, we have a tendency to be a little brash at sometimes, and a little narcissistic sometimes, but we have the very best dictionaries of anywhere in the world. And the reason I say that is words like the are actually given a definition in the dictionary. Now you have to look for it sometimes. The word the in most dictionaries says that one which is here or which has been mentioned, and immediately, obviously, this was done by a word thinker. Because it's not one definition there, it's two. So if we're going to do it with clay, we have to break it down to the two, okay? So if I'm working with a person, adult or a child, and if the person can read, I have them read the meaning in the dictionary of the word. If they can't, then I read it to them. And after the reading is done, we discuss what that could mean. So I've just now done this, let's say with a 9-year-old, that one which is here or which has been mentioned. You know? So now we're reoriented now. He has controlled that. He's turned off the disorientation. And we're talking about, you know, that one, what? I don't know. Well, who would know? Well, who is talking or who is writing? Well, if I'm talking, then I'm the one that decides. You know? So we're discussing this back and forth until the little light goes on. When the little light goes on with him, he's suddenly got his hands in the clay, and he might make a little book, and in the book is the word "the," right? And then underneath it is the word "the," and he's a big smile on his face. There is one that is mentioned. Okay. Okay, but there is one that is mentioned, but it is also the one that is there. Ah, okay. So he's down there then, and he makes a ball, puts it on the table. There's one that is there, right? Ah, yeah, there's one. That's exactly what it says. Okay, but it's not mentioned. Ah, so he takes the book, he takes the word "the" off the book, and he puts the word "ball" in the book. There's one that is there. There, one is mentioned. For the rest of his life, that word will never, ever again cause the confusion that can simulate a disorientation. It's done. Now, in the English language that we speak, we have found there are 217 words that have the potential to cause disorientation. Not all of them will cause it with all of the dyslexic people, but it's better to be safe than sorry. We need to master all of the words that way. Well, 217, and let's say that it takes 5 minutes to master a word. I mean, theoretically, we should be able to get this done fairly quickly. So within 3 months or so, it is possible to be finished. I have to tell you, most of us take longer than that. We want to go on vacation, we want to skip a day here and there, I mean, but it's totally okay. When we have mastered the trigger words, we would say, aha, that's it. But words are not the only thing that can trigger it that way. Most of us dyslexics will trigger on punctuation marks. Some of the punctuation marks will trigger some of us. The rest of us will trigger on all of them. So punctuation is as much a trigger as trigger words are. So we have to master the punctuation marks. Also, some of us will have certain speech sounds that will trigger us. So we have to find a way of finding the speech sounds that are triggers and master them. Well, we call those extraneous triggers. In addition to that, almost all of us will trigger on certain letters of the alphabet. And guess what? If we have a trigger letter, any word that has that letter in it then is a trigger word. So we must also master the alphabet letters, uppercase and lowercase. So that, other than the words, all of these other things are what I call extraneous. When a child is working with a facilitator, all of that work gets done as a part of the initial program. So all that is left are the trigger words that are left. And the person is trained to know how to do the symbol mastery, the mechanics. What they need maybe is a helper to help them deal with the definitions in the dictionary, somebody to bounce the ideas off of back and forth. So when we designed a program, we looked at, in the design, what it would take for a facilitator to do the whole program with a child, and how much that would cost. Or if we could recruit the assistance of a parent and have the parent provide the majority of the work, and what that kind of a program would cost. And we decided to go that way. So in addition to getting rid of the extraneous triggers and preparing the student to do the work, we also train a helper for the student. A parent, a grandparent, in some cases a sibling, and in the past I have trained as many as 12 people to help one dyslexic child so that we get the job done. When we're dealing with adults, and what they're really after is to get rid of the old solutions. What we have to do to get rid of an old solution is systematically master the reason why it's there. In other words, we have to master all of the triggers. And when all of the triggers are mastered, then what we need to do is be alive. And by being alive, we will begin to experience things that work better than the old solution. By mastering the reason why it was there, takes away the compulsive nature of it. It's no longer a compulsive behavior. So by being alive, we're accidentally going to run into stuff that works better than it did. And the moment that happens, that old solution gets set on the back burner, and you have a new way of doing something that is faster and better than the old solution. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the new thing that you have, it might only be new for a week, and then it's replaced with something that's even better than that. And many adult dyslexics are a little bit afraid to do this because, you know, by barely hanging on with my fingernails, I managed to get this far. Let's just not rock the boat. I mean, let's just leave the sleeping dogs asleep, you know, without realizing that you can't make it worse. There's nothing that you could do that would make it worse than what it is. So the only way that you can change it is by replacing it with something that is better. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we have then the two approaches that we have to do. The first approach is you have to show the person how to turn off a disorientation. Then we have to get them so they can recognize when they're disoriented so they know how to turn it off. They will, most dyslexics in a very short period of time will be an expert at turning it on and off and realize we can't just teach them how to turn it off. It goes both ways. So once they have the ability to turn it on and turn it off, then we have the opportunity to address the real culprit, and that is the confusion in the blank picture. And all we're really doing is filling in the blanks. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. I don't know what more I could cover other than maybe answer questions that you would have about particulars. So if anyone has a question, now would be the time to catch me.
Computer games, television, what kind of role are they screwing our dyslexic kids up or helping them or what?
Well, I certainly wouldn't restrict my child from doing computer games. I mean, this is, you know, they're going to be very good at it. And
Okay, I want to rephrase that. Game Boys, GameCubes.
oh yeah.
Aren't computer games.
Okay, even all of that. Oftentimes you'll have a student that the teacher will say the kid doesn't pay any attention. I mean, what this teacher is saying is that he doesn't concentrate or pay attention to the teacher, and assumes that that is true across the board. But you give him a Game Boy, and you can see how he can pay attention. So the Game Boy isn't going to resolve the dyslexia. That is not a treatment. But you can punish him by taking it away. But it's not going to help, nor is it going to hinder the dyslexia. I don't know if that makes sense. Did I answer the question?
She asked about television too.
Oh, I mean, God, if it wasn't for television, I wouldn't be educated. I mean, I learn a lot of stuff on Discovery Channel and Animal Planet, and you know,
Yeah.
all kinds of good stuff. And television is a great tool if we're using it for education. And when I was younger, I couldn't sit still long enough to watch any TV. I mean, I can remember before there was even TV to have. And when the television did come, I wasn't very much interested in it. Now that I'm older, I really like being entertained. So the entertainment part of it, I don't know how good that is for children. I think that they should find experiences more valuable than entertainment. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I would encourage them to go out in real life and have experiences and use the entertainment as reward. I think entertainment as a reward is a better thing. Is good? Okay. And over here.
Those 217 trigger words are all those words like and, there, the things, non-nouns, non-describing type words?
Yeah, the question is the 217 trigger words are simple words like and, the, and not nouns. Okay. Those of you that are teachers would be familiar with something called the Dolch list. And the Dolch list is a long, I think it's what, like 280 words or something like that are supposed to be sight recognizable by a child finishing first grade. All of our trigger words are on that list. In fact, the way the discovery was made is that we were deep into the research, and there were 6 of us that were guinea pigs. And at that point in time, we knew that words were the trigger. We knew that it was confusion that was causing it. And the 6 of us, what we were doing is we had to find our own trigger words. So we started making the list of the words that were triggering us. And after 2 weeks of doing this, I am so ashamed of my list, I don't want anybody else to see it. Because it's got 2 and 3 and 4 letter words on it. I mean, it's not what I thought it was going to be. And after a month of doing this, I made the other guys give me the list, and none of us wanted to reveal it. And I was absolutely stunned. I thought that we would have, each one of us would have maybe 20 or 30 trigger words, and each one of us was going to be different. We wouldn't have any of them necessarily in common. And it turned out that all of our lists essentially were the same list.
So with adults, do you still have them do the models, a model for each of those trigger words?
The question is, as adults, do you have them make models of the trigger words? Absolutely. Yep. It's the only way you can master it. Now, we have tried other ways of doing it other than using clay. We have tried allowing people to act out scenarios or do little skits or even draw or paint. And for some reason, it doesn't work. And what is it that doesn't work? Okay. What has to happen is when you hear or see the word, within 1/32 of a second of realizing what you have experienced, you have to have the image for the meaning of that word. In other words, you don't have time to try to remember what it means or time to even realize that you don't know what it means. That image has to be instantaneous. And the only way we can get that instantaneous meaning is by using the clay. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's what it is that we need to do. And I will say this. If the powers that be knew the power of clay, they would make it illegal. A question here.
With also the letters?
The same thing with the letters? Yes. Now, in the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, there is a chart that has the letters the way we use it. At our website, if you're going to do this with a lot of people, you can get strips, alphabet strips. And we even had to be a little bit cagey. We mastered the uppercase first, and those of us adult dyslexic and even younger ones, we are so good at creating old solutions. We might have even created an old solution with the uppercase when we were going through the mastery step. So when you flip it over and it's the lowercase, it's backwards. And you know, we did that on purpose to make sure that we're not dealing with another old solution here. So, and for the phonics part, instead of doing phonics, any good dictionary will have the pronunciation key. And in fact, the good dictionaries will have it on every other page. And you just use the pronunciation key of a dictionary and you will get all of the speech sounds. so you don't have to look hard to find it to be in the dictionary. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Another question, back.
How do you correlate for a child being in school, in a general public school system, and they're trying to teach them phonics, and then you have this other concept? I mean, what happens to the, if you sit through class, and they're trying to still teach him the phonics, he's got this other way of learning. How do they blend together?
Well, the question is, if you have a student that is in public school and they're teaching him phonics and you're giving him a different method of doing something, how do you correlate that, and what would we expect from a child? Okay, one of the biggest problems we have is to get them to stop sounding the words out, because this is something that is so ingrained in them, and it is absolutely it's the worst possible thing they could be doing. So oftentimes when you say, okay, you don't have to sound out any more words, you get a great big grin that can light up the world. And then they start doing it the way that you're showing them. And the 3 steps of easier reading, it's in 3 pieces, okay? And the first piece is called spell reading, and you do this after they've learned the alphabet. And what they do is they spell the word, and then you say what that spelled word is, and then they say it after you do. And you do that until they get to the point where they're recognizing a lot of the words. And then you switch to something called sweep, sweep, spell, where they sweep their eye across the word. If it doesn't jump out of their mouth, they sweep it a second time. If it doesn't jump out of their mouth, they spell it, you say it, they say it. And then the last one, when they're getting all of the words like that, then the last part is picture of punctuation. So you have this technique, and he's getting punctuation or phonics at school. It didn't work before, so there's, you just have to tell them. They're going to torture you with this, and it's just part of the price you have to pay for the gift that you've got. And just endure it as best you can. Does that make sense? Now, there are some teachers that will back off. I mean, not all teachers are so dyed-in-the-wool phonics that they won't back off when they see improvement occurring. But then there are other ones that have a great deal of money and time invested in the phonics approach that can't back off from it. So the child is going to get tortured. A question there.
Yeah, so if the children can be recognized at a young enough age and taught not in the phonics, but in a more picture recognition type way, then we're not going to have as many adults struggling with this emotion of.
Well, I mean, if you take the question out of your voice and listen to your words, you're saying what I would be saying to you. Yes, the answer is yes.
So it's just a matter of when you're an adult going back and starting at the beginning and catching back up.
Right.
Under a different system.
Okay, I'm going to do a little sidestep. In our society, we have been geared to treating symptoms of problems and not treating causes of problems. And we've been geared to solving problems by building new dams or building new roads. Okay? I am a much simpler person than that. The only real solution to a problem is the elimination of the problem. Because if you solve a problem, before long you're going to be solving that solution as a problem. If you are treating the symptoms, you are never treating the cause. It never actually changes. So the only solution is, if you eliminate the reason why the problem exists, the problem stops existing. That's the only real way to solve a problem, is to eliminate the reason that it exists. And in doing that, the problem is no longer there needing to be solved. Does that make sense? Yeah. A question?
How does that relate to attention deficit disorder? Lots of kids with dyslexia also have the diagnosis of attention deficit.
Okay. The question is, how does this relate to attention deficit disorder, and do children that have the diagnosis of dyslexia also have ADD? Okay. That's a pretty sticky wicket. Okay. When a person is born with dyslexia, what they're actually born with is a genetic code that they got from one of their parents or both of them that allows them to have access to disorientation. Okay? Once they discover disorientation, there's a lot of things they can do with it. They can use it to recognize objects in the environment or people. They can use it to explore the environment. And then when they get a little older, they can use it to create reading problems and writing problems and spelling problems. And that I've talked about already. I must tell you that the primary use for disorientation, for all of us that can do it, is for entertainment. And when we become disoriented, we can create a world that no one else can see. And we can populate that world with friends and foes, and we can fly through space in cardboard boxes and fight dinosaurs on strange planets. And we can live in a world that is of our own creation. And without realizing what it is that we're doing, we are creating ADD. Because let's step back for just a moment. One of the primary goals that we have as a child is to learn the lessons necessary for us to survive and exist as adults. And the way we learn those lessons are experientially at the knee of a parent or in our environment, experiencing real-world phenomenon. The problem is if you are disorienting and you're creating an imaginary world, real-world principles do not apply. For instance, the concept of consequence. In the real world, if you have an accident and the neighbor's cat gets killed, tomorrow that cat is still dead. But if in your imaginary world you spend the whole day fighting your enemies, and at the end of the day they're all dead, and the next morning they're all back up again and going, and you can spend the day doing it all over again, there is no consequence in the imaginary world. So what will happen is we have an individual that his concept of consequence is out of sync with what the reality of consequence is. And from that one little seed, we can grow everything that we need to talk about for ADD. So what we do with ADD isn't master necessarily the trigger words that will cause confusion in reading, because many of the ADD students do not have a reading problem. What we master are the concepts that the individual missed by living in an imaginary world, like the concept of consequence. Now, I'm going to step over a little bit, because ADD is recognized by a set of behaviors that the person is manifesting. Every behavior we manifest, everything that we do it to support our identity. And we don't do anything that doesn't support our identity. Well, here this person is doing something that nobody likes, and he won't stop. And he can't stop because it supports his identity. The solution then, the only real solution that will work, is you have to lead him into creating for himself a change in his identity to an identity that does not need that behavior. And the moment his identity has changed to an identity that doesn't need the behavior, it's gone. He won't even remember having done it. And when you consider most children that have ADD, you know, they've got 6 or 7 of these behaviors. I mean, that's a lot fewer than 217 trigger words. Does that make sense? So, yes, we have to approach it differently. Now, I'm going to expand on what you said just a little bit. When we were doing our early research, I was one of 15 people on the research team. I was the primary picture thinker, and the rest of these guys are word thinkers. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to redefine dyslexia. We're trying to create a new model for understanding it. And every day they're coming up with more language, and I'm shaking my head up and down, not understanding what they're talking about. So what I needed was, I needed a visual model that I could look at so that I could understand how it is that dyslexia can affect so many places individually, how there can be variations in the severity and it all be the same thing. So what I came up with was the idea of the genetic code we're born with. We're born with like a very large gemstone. It's raw, it's not cut and polished, but it is a gemstone. And every day of our lives, we will cut and polish a little bit on our gemstone. So by the time it's time for us to go to school, we've already got a lot of the facets in the right places. And every facet on that gemstone represents one of the characteristics that we will have for dyslexia. So we might have one facet that will prevent us from learning how to read, right next to another facet that allows us to have imaginary friends, right next to another facet that will prevent us from learning how to spell, next to another facet that prevents us from being able to sit still, and another facet that allows us to master things 10 times faster than other people can. So all of the different characteristics of dyslexia are determined by the individual and how they polish their individual gemstone. Any one or all of them are possible. It's just how the individual, their day-to-day existence determines which ones they're going to have. So now we can understand how it is one person has a little bit of difficulty reading and everything else is fine, and another person can't read, write, spell, or do math. And then another person did perfectly in school, never any problem. But they can never remember where they parked their car. Or they can't find their glasses because they put them on to look for them. Okay. Dyslexia can show itself in many different ways. The majority of people that have dyslexia don't have a problem severe enough to even suspect that there is a problem there. That's the majority. Those of us that struggle in school, we are by far the minority. Does that make sense? Okay. Now way in the back. Yes.
In environments where children are learning first and second language.
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing. I don't hear well in the first place, and you're so far I can't read your lips.
In environments where children are learning first and second language at the same time, how can teachers and parents help them, and what is beneficial for them?
There are many places where this has happened, and there are different techniques. If you are mastering a word, what you're actually mastering is an idea that is represented by a sound. And that sound will be different in either language, but the idea is the same. So what I would do is I would create the meaning of the word and master it in my native language, the one that I speak when I'm at home. And then I would remove that word, and the second language, I would put the word in the second language and go through the mastery step with it in that language, do both at the same time. And that would be the best way to do it, in my opinion. Did I answer your question? Excellent. Over here.
I have a question about neurofeedback, and if you have any knowledge about that helping in learning disorders and dyslexia. And I was told, too, that a lot of depression comes from learning disorders and that weren't taken care of, so that you should treat the learning disorder before the depression. Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to answer that. The first question about neurofeedback. I'm afraid I don't know very much about it. I've had a sketchy description of it given to me, and from the sketchy description, I cannot see mechanically how it could work. Other than, just like biofeedback, you are going after certain brainwave patterns that feel better than other ones. And therefore, the end result, even though it might be spectacular in the beginning, is not going to have a long effect. Now, that is about as critical as I can be without knowing the mechanics of it. And the second part about depression and learning disabilities. Every time a person becomes disoriented, we alter our sense of time. Our sense of time is actually controlled by a chemical in our system called dopamine. So every time a person disorients, they change the amount of dopamine their brain is making. And as it turns out, there's more than that. Every time a person disorients, we alter the amount of dopamine, melatonin, and serotonin that our brain is making. In order for us to not have depression, the amount of brain chemistry has to stay in balance. And every disorientation is we kick it out of balance. So there are two approaches that we can take to this. One, by maintaining our orientation, we are experiencing less disorientation. And when we're really young, our brain can balance itself oftentimes in seconds. But as we get older, it takes longer and longer. So this is more a characteristic of adult dyslexics than children. Okay? The medical profession doesn't get involved very much with nutrition. So as a result of that, the medical doctors can't tell us what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating in regard to brain chemistry and depression. I will say this, that the full range of vitamin B, if taken on a regular basis, will help adults balance their brain chemistry. Now, if I'm not taking vitamin B, I can start to experience depression. If I'm taking vitamin B, I can get disoriented as much as I want without any worry about depression. I'm not a health food nut, and I don't recommend vitamin regimens other than the full range of vitamin B. So depression can be a byproduct of disorientation, yes. And more questions.
Do you find that many children with dyslexia or learning disabilities?
I mean, you're going to have to talk in the...
I was wondering along that line too, if any children that they done studies to see if they self-medicate. Like you were saying that you didn't want to do drugs because it made you more disoriented, but some people, with learning disabilities or attention deficit, they say try to self-medicate.
Right. I'll get into that. Okay. The primary drug that is used to treat ADD is Ritalin. And then there are other drugs like Cylert and ones that have different generic names that essentially are the same or do the same thing. Realize that these drugs are very heavy stimulants. And a person who is a disorienter will react differently to drugs and medication than someone who is not a disorienter. So any drugs, all drugs, can be a problem for a person who is a disorienter. The dosages are usually incorrect. Even common medicine, the dose is either only half enough or 2 times too much. Okay, and what happens with stimulants and depressants is that they are reversed. A stimulant will act as a depressant for a dyslexic person or an ADD person. A depressant will act as a stimulant for an ADD person or a dyslexic person. So there is this reversal that is there. Once the person is oriented, it switches back. In other words, I used to drink 35 cups of coffee in a day and didn't have any difficulty sleeping. Now that I'm oriented, most of the time, I don't drink coffee in the afternoon. Caffeine works as good as Ritalin. So coffee, Coca-Cola, any soft drink that has caffeine in it. And if you went to work for Bill Gates, you would be required practically to drink fortified Coca-Cola that has more caffeine in it. He knows that it is people like us that make that whole world move. And he wants us all to be self-medicating. So if there's anybody that you know that drinks 35 cups of coffee in a day or always has a Coca-Cola in their hand, guess what they're doing? They are self-medicating. More questions, way up in the back. Yeah.
I just wanted you to speak more about the role of the parents in working with the dyslexic child. You said that you trained the parents. It sounds like the process is more one of training the parents and then passing and having them pass it on to the child.
Well, it's a very interesting perspective, if I understand you correctly. Dr. Ali, who is a part of getting everything going in the beginning, came to me in the first year and said, you know, we need to be working with the parents before we work with the children. And my feeling has always been, well, we need to go where the fire is and put the fire out, and then after the fire's out, then we can address the other aspects. But when we're going to be addressing this kind of a problem, everybody involved in it needs to know the mechanics of it. So that is the aspect of where we're involved with the parents. Oftentimes, as a child is going through a program, before the program is over, the parent will come to you in the quiet and tell you, you know, I think I have this too. And what should we do about it? And a lot of people who are involved in our organization feels that everyone that has dyslexia should fix it. I have to tell you that that is not my opinion. I think anyone that is suffering as a result of it should fix it, or anyone that wants to fix it should fix it. But those of us that make it in life without it, we should be honoring those people because they have fought the tiger with a stick and they're winning. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. I hope I answered your question. Now, there was one down here, right here.
It goes in that same line, but how can, do you train educators at all to help support the parents with this or be a coach of some sort?
Well, okay, the question is, do we train educators to help the parents in some sort? Actually, not in the vein that you're asking, but yes, that is our primary task. A lot of people who are trained with us are people who have been teachers in the past and either retired or left teaching for whatever reason. And they find this and say, this is what I was looking for all along. Now, when we're doing what we need to do in the school setting, because dyslexia itself changes over time, we can prevent dyslexia with Davis learning strategies. But once a person is 9 years old, we can intervene with it, but we can't prevent it because it's already in progress. And after the child is 12, we can't even intervene anymore. There we must do a correction. Does that make sense? So when we're doing the earliest stages in the classroom, there we don't need the parent involved in it, other than we always would like the parent to understand the mechanics of what's happening. The parent has the right to know what's going on with their child. Okay, so you can see the difficulty that we're having. All facilitators, if they're working with a client, will train a parent or even a teacher or someone else to assist the individual. If the person doesn't need assistance, then why do we need to train the parent? Yeah, okay. So a question up here on the, yes.
You had said that you did some studies in schools in California. Are they now using your strategies in their school systems, or?
There are some schools that are using it, and actually, the question is, we did the studies in California, and are the schools still using it? These were pilot studies that we were paying for, and the schools, for the most part, are not. There was a study done through Gonzaga University that was published. There were supposed to be 3 or 4 articles published. So far, there's only been 1. And I think from our website, you can get a copy of that. Now, a little sidestep. In America, there is a lot of competition for the dollars that are in the school budgets. And a lot of that money is divvied up based on political connections and other kinds of things that we don't qualify for. Where we are the most popular is where that mechanic isn't in place. And for instance, the country of Iceland, a very small country, 600,000 year-round population. In the year 1947, a study was done, and the result of that study said that the Icelandic people were the most literate people on the planet Earth. And at first they said, oh, that's very nice, and we like that. And you know, within 20 years, it has now become a part of their persona, and all of them were proud of that, and they would be very quick to tell you that we are the most literate society in the world. And at that point in time, if you were to mention the word dyslexia to them, they'd say, oh, we don't have that. It's not a problem. In 1997, another study was done, and Iceland slipped from being #1 to being #4. And they don't like that idea at all, because being #1 is part of their heritage, and they will do anything to get it back. Davis Learning Strategies is going into the public school system in Iceland very, very quickly, because it was the one system they found that actually worked, and they're going to be #1 again. Also in New Zealand, it's going there as well, quite well. So America is going to probably follow behind a lot of the other countries in getting something good in. And to tell you the truth, I don't think that Learning Strategies is going to go in very well in America as long as I'm alive. It's the kind of thing that the originator has to be dead before it has any value. So, I mean, our people are looking forward to the day, I think. Anyway, a question here in the front.
Yeah, I have a question. If you could maybe explain it to me. I understand the basic premise behind the program, using clay or models to recognize words. But how do you go about somebody that has, let's say, has to read or spell words like in a college setting, let's say for like huge words like psychology, microeconomics, words like that that might come across when reading. Like really complex Greek, all those kind of.
Well, most dyslexics do not have difficulty with complex words. And this has always been a surprise to, you know, the teachers and educators. Like, he can do knowledge, and he can do, you know, recreation and these great big words, and he stumbles on the or and. What's going on? The big words are not necessarily trigger words. However, to a degree they can be, just because they're big. But once the individual realizes that big is not necessarily bad, then they can deal with that. But all words are symbols, and all symbols have 3 parts. And if you are really going to master a symbol, you have to have all 3 parts. So even people who are good word thinkers, if they're going to actually use their vocabulary for anything other than communication, should master the meaning of the words. Does that make sense? There's a difference between mastery and understanding. Understanding is all mental. Mastery happens outside of your head. So you can cause it to happen with your fingers in the clay. So there's nothing wrong with mastering nouns. They're easy. I mean, they go real fast. Did I answer your question, I hope? Okay. Here, sir.
I've been told that in Japan, dyslexia is a little problem because they're using visual symbols that represent the thing they're talking about.
Yeah. For the benefit of everyone, he has been told that dyslexia is very, very low in Japan because their language are little symbols that are pictures. Is that correct? Okay. Actually, my book is translated into the Japanese language. And when the Japanese individuals are learning their language in school, they're learning a phonetics-based symbolic system. So they actually have exactly the same problems we have, and also at the same number, slightly less. Now, in the Italian language, oddly enough, the numbers are actually lower than they are in English. And the number of trigger words in Italian are fewer than in English. So as a general rule, American English, we have the next to fewest number of trigger words. When you get into a language like German or Icelandic where you have the declinations, oh my God, it's like you have a little hill that has become Mount Everest. I mean, it seems like you will never get it done. And also in Chinese, a lot of my work is translated into Chinese, but there isn't actually a published volume of any of my work in the Chinese language. Yet the problems exist everywhere. Because even in Chinese, where the language is pictographic, when the children are learning it in school, that learning process is phonetic based. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Okay. And right here.
I guess I must have missed the 3 components of mastery. What are they?
Okay. Well, I'm going to do a part of a step back. All words are symbols. And all symbols are composed of 3 parts. What the symbol looks like when we see it, what it sounds like when we hear it, and what it means. So when we master a word in clay, if we are picture thinking, if we try to master the sound first, there is no foundation inside of our head for it to stick to. The sound goes in one ear and it comes out the other ear. You can't even trap it in there, okay? What it looks like also comes and it goes. I mean, you can't hold it. We think with meaning. So what we have to do first is we need to make the meaning first. Once we've created that meaning, we have a foundation for the other 2 pieces to stick to. So by following the proper sequence, we can get it done that way. Did that make sense?
That does, so that explains to me too. I was wondering why precisely the phonetics-based approach doesn't work, and it's because it's not based on the meaning, it's based on the sound.
You've got it exactly. You've got it. I mean, you said it better than I could have. I would have used more words.
I just wanted to know, if you were doing play and you were doing all these things, don't you think art in the school systems would create a system where dyslexia could actually utilize some of this visual imagery more quickly? Since they've eliminated art in the school systems, it seems like these kids have no ability to create a solid meaning.
Well, you are talking to exactly the wrong person for that. I mean, I'm a guy that got absolutely nothing out of school at all. I mean, you know, if I were going to design school, I would make it a lot different than what the current thing is. Our Davis Learning Strategies, I was not the designer of that. I was the consultant on that. And we made it fit all my ideas, but it was actually created by a 2nd grade school teacher.
What would your design be?
Pardon me?
What would your design be?
For school? Yeah. Oh, I'm going to make enemies maybe, but what I would do is I would cause a revolution in the population where we would approach the legislators, the federal guys, and insist that they give us a purpose, a written statement of purpose of education in America. Because, you know, most people don't know that we actually do have that. And the people that do know are probably Supreme Court justices, and they don't want you to know what it is. Okay? And all of this happened so long ago, people that are involved in education have no idea what the purpose of education is. The people involved in government have no idea what the purpose of education is. And every school has a mission statement. They're all different. They're what the principal or whoever thinks would be a good thing, right? What we've got then is chaos. And chaos breeds chaos. So we have no, I mean, every person that is a teacher has a reason why they teach. And each one of them is personal to the individual. And they think that that is common amongst everybody, and it is not. So the first thing that we need is we need our government somehow to say the purpose of education in America is to, whatever they say, it doesn't matter. I would like it if it was good, but it wouldn't matter what it is, okay? And then from that purpose, we can create goals. And from those goals, we can then determine whether or not we're doing the right thing. And if we're doing the right thing, that we should continue doing what we're doing. And if we're not doing the right thing, we should be looking for something else. But without the purpose, the goals have no foundation. So we can say the goal of education is, and not make it, and nobody notices. I mean, the purpose of education, I mean, to a politician, the purpose of education is to get votes. You talk about education and you talk about how you're going to fix it, you get votes, and then you forget all about it because it doesn't matter. You're already in office. So without a purpose for education, we flounder. Then once that purpose is there, then we can start looking for improvement. I will tell you that had I been educatable when I was younger, my lot in life probably would have been theoretical physics. My love of mathematics and the ease at which mathematics is a part of who and what I am would have been an ideal place for me. A friend of mine that is a physicist and his mother got from the National Archives copies of all of the speeches that were given to our Congress and our legislators at the time that our federal government decided that we would have free public education paid for by the federal government. And I think that if the people in this audience knew what our legislators were being told, they would take their children out of school. Based on these documents, they concluded that the purpose of education in America was to make docile, controllable citizens that are willing to give up their lives for the lies of the government. And I will say this, if the CIA came to me and asked me to create a brainwashing technique that we could use in America to provide controllable, docile citizens that will give up their lives for the lies of the government, I could not come up with a better system than what is already in place in America. Now that I've made enemies of the teachers in this place, I must say, I have a very tight schedule today, and I'm going to have to boogie to the airport, and we could probably sit and do this for hours more, but I'm afraid I don't have the time. My history is autism, and I'm not always aware of when I'm offending people. Sometimes I have an idea, but I'm not always aware when I'm doing it. And when I started being afraid of offending people, I almost got to the point where I couldn't talk anymore. So in order for me to be able to give the lecture, I have to be willing to be offensive, yet in order to do it comfortably, I must also apologize. So if I said anything or did anything today that offended any of you, I apologize. It is not intentional. I want to be honest and truthful and give it to you the way I see it, and that's the best I can do. So I hope that you feel that you got something of value today. If you did, then I did a good job. If you didn't, then maybe I'm an entertainer. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you being here. As a final note, before you go, there are facilitators that are in our area that are in the audience, and those of you that might want to see who they are, if you would, all of you that are facilitators, stand up. All right. So.
Let me give you the mic. What's that?
Are the names of these people on your website?
Yes, their names are on the website. They're also included in the newsletter that you received, except for one. One of them isn't, but you can get a chance to grab these people. Instead of being able to talk to me, they'll have to be my substitutes because I have to go to the airport. Is good? Again, thank you for coming.